Hello, and welcome to the Dissonance Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Mike Burke and Elizabeth Spivak discuss political conflict from the perspective of evolutionary psychology.
Hello, and today we are looking at partisan conflict, hostility, why people who call themselves conservatives, who often aren't conservative, and why also people who call themselves liberal, who often aren't liberal either, can find themselves in conflict with each other. So the article is called Cultural Animal Theory of Political Partisan Conflict and Hostility by Roy F. Baumeister and Brad J. Bushman. Wow, those are two relatively easy to pronounce names.
Yeah.
Good.
And Baumeister, particularly, he's had a long career. I did not know that he had gone to Australia, but he's had a long career here in the States. And he wrote a pretty famous, if you can call a psychology paper famous, about the need to belong. So that would be like 30 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a pretty famous article, Baumeister and Leary, about the need to belong. And I would say that, this kind of has that flavor to it a little bit, sort of talking about how people are motivated by a desire to, be in cohesive, productive, happy kind of groups. And that's a shared motive amongst most humans and primates. I mean, he says cultural animal theory, so we are cultural animals, and he does sort of he does mention non-human animals a little bit in this paper. So I just want to just say, they sum this up. The goal of this article is to articulate a theory of partisan hostility that accounts for the perennial and recently escalating partisanship and opposition. It is a cultural theory with an evolutionary basis. So that's their sum of, but I picked it because, he cites John Stuart Mill and a few other, philosophers. And I know that, you have been talking a lot on this podcast and outside, because we interact outside, about how, the extent to which people are more alike than different, and that people who are not extreme right and extreme left have pretty, much more similar kind of goals and values. So that's kind of why I picked the article.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, just a note on the issue of belonging that kind of you brought to the foreground there. As I keep saying, I noticed that many people who call themselves liberal are anything but liberal. Particularly the people who call themselves very liberal. They tend to be very, very authoritarian, which misses the liberty in liberal, which is the key point of liberalism. And similarly, and I suppose we can get into this as we look at the definitions of liberal and conservative, which in this article are actually better than I commonly find in social psychology. There is a little bit of ideological discussion there, right? And a lot of social psychology just goes with self-identity.
They have an explanation of key terms, and I did wonder what you thought of those.
No, pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. They seem not perfect. They seem to define liberal as progressive, which isn't necessarily the case, right? You can be a Marxist, for example, would never describe themselves as liberal. Marxism is very much a repudiation of the liberal order as kind of being this kind of excuse for the bourgeoisie to go and oppress everybody. And they would see all of that as an illusion. They want to do away with all of that, right? And replace it with something different. I mean, there are people who are kind of Marxist inspired who are liberals, but a typical Soviet style Marxist approach would definitely see itself as progressive, but it definitely wouldn't see itself as liberal. Um, Similarly, if you're going to put, and they do this, and everybody does this, and it's just wrong. If you're going to put liberal and conservative on a scale, you also fail to acknowledge the fact that conservatism as a political ideology was pretty much explicitly created as a means to defending English liberalism and liberty from the authoritarian threat. Well, from authoritarian threats broadly, but specifically from the authoritarian threat that was posed by the Jacobins during the French Revolution. So there are issues with what they're doing. I don't think it's 100% ideologically coherent.
I mean, they do
But I
say
get where they're coming from.
they do
Yeah.
say something that you say quite a bit. Maintaining the status quo is the literal
Mm-hmm.
meaning of conservative.
Yes.
So
Well,
wishing
not,
to
not quite.
no, but I mean, it was closer than what.
No, it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
from what I've
Conserving
read.
the current arrangement, which isn't what you say, but it's
No.
what they're what they say.
And to be fair, I would agree that that's what most conservatives are. Most conservatives, I think, people who are because I don't think I'm psychologically conservative, right? I don't think I'm predisposed to be a conservative psychologically. What I agree with is the philosophy. So a psychological conservative rather than a philosophical conservative would be somebody who is naturally inclined to conserving the status quo because the status quo is really, really, really good, right? You know, if you look at how things are in America right now, albeit with all of the many various problems it has with immigration, although I don't really think immigration into America is a problem based on the kind of immigrants that you tend to get, or fentanyl, which certainly is a problem, or not being able to recruit as well as you would like for the armed forces, which is another problem. You know, there are all these problems in America. But basically the status quo is great, you know, versus other countries right now, or even America in the past. And so, you know, the psychological conservative would want to conserve that. A more philosophical approach would say, yes, we do want to conserve that, but part of conserving that is incremental change.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you think of it from an evolutionary point of view, any organism has to adapt to its environment, and if it can't adapt to its environment, it goes extinct. And the same is true of a nation state. You know, you might want to conserve all these things and think they're wonderful, but you have to embrace incremental change, otherwise the nation state can't adapt to its environment. So conservatism actually, as a philosophical approach, as opposed to a kind of a psychological conservative, does embrace change as a kind of a core part of its way of organizing the world, if you like. So yeah, no, but basically very good. I mean, I wish they'd been more explicit by saying people who are psychologically inclined towards conservatism, as opposed to. But you know, I'm splitting hairs. I you know, compared to the vast majority of stuff I've read, it was actually very, very, very good.
So they are kind of, taking it, especially at the beginning of the article, the sort of like evolutionary biological sort of approach, and talking about the quantity and quality of life. And they say we propose that the political right is focusing on the issue of amassing resources. So that kind of ends up, being threaded through, whereas the political left tends to focus on distributing the resources. And both of those, the authors are arguing that both of those positively contribute to society's well-being. And so they're really making and I really liked what's the John Stuart Mill quote at the end? Like, both parties are good at what they're. Oh, wait a minute, I have to go find it because I don't know.
I'm looking for it now as well.
I mean, I'm sure you've heard it a million times, but for me, invoking the philosopher John Stuart Mill wrote that with regard to political differences, both sides are correct about the things they care most about.
Right. And Edmund Burke, my favorite political philosopher, he was a Whig. So he was you know about the Whigs? You had Whigs in
Hmm.
America as well at one
Oh
point,
yeah.
didn't you? So yeah, he was a Whig politician, which would then go on to be what is now the Liberal Democrat political party. So certainly the more liberal of the two main parties at the time, which was the Whig Party and the Tory Party, which would go on to be the Conservative Party. So it's kind of funny that Burke is considered to be the founder of conservatism, but was a liberal, quite a progressive reformer by his time, who was opposed to the slave trade and for American independence as well. The way that he put it would be that and I think this is a theme that really runs through this paper, that you need, at least two political parties, because one political party will capture one side of reality and the other political party will capture the other side of reality, and you need to capture both sides of reality within a liberal democratic system. That was very contrasted to Thomas Paine, who argued against partisanship and thought partisanship was awful, whereas Burke was, no, this is a really good thing that's evolved, and okay, it's easy to point out the problems with it, right? Paine could point out the problems, and that's easy, but creating something new, kind of ex nihilo, out of nothing, it is hard, and if you try and do that, the chances are it's going to be an absolute disaster. So he recognized that too, and this is a theme throughout the paper, that you definitely need opposing ideological viewpoints, even if it results in gridlock every now and again.
Right. And they're actually arguing that this back and forth, is really the best. Also, that
Correct. Yeah.
yeah. So, and they do, they don't like authoritarians. I mean, they do, authoritarians, regardless of whether Democrat or Republican, gravitate towards the partisan extremes to fulfill their psychological needs for certainty and order. So there's your, little mention of psychological conservatism or conservatism.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So they mention, out party hate and, so out group motivation, I guess, is really not the main focus of the paper, but they do mention that. I would say it's much more in group, again, the need to belong. Maybe that's my bias, because I already knew about the need to belong, that whole line of research, 30 or so years of research. So,
I mean, on the need to belong, before we, because it's worth making a couple of points here. It's that especially when you, as we keep saying, when you come across these wokies, who are presumably high IQ because they work at universities, although you never know, who strongly identify with this stuff, who will publish and present on this stuff, and yet when you really push them, they don't actually know what they're talking about. They haven't read the literature that they invest their identities into. And so, that being the case, the natural conclusion to make would be that they're not really inspired by the ideas, because they don't know what the ideas are, or they only kind of dimly infer them, and they don't care enough about the ideas to look them up. It would seem to be much more, base tribal alignment. And that goes for people on the right as well. So if you look at the MAGA movement,
humans have evolved to create, social bonds, and to, it has, impacted our survival and, our quality of life.
Right. I mean, it was almost, we can't go and test because they're not here anymore, but it was almost certainly there with Homo erectus, Australopithecus, going back to our kind of ancestors, our proto-human ancestors. It was almost the same with them. I mean, what I find interesting is not that human beings are doing this, right? It's that they can't be bothered to make a good case for themselves. Like, if I was I would have thought that if I wanted to identify as a Wokey, that I would actually bother to read the literature. Even if my motivation was purely base, it was purely tribal, I would think that I would want to read up on it to give a good show, in the same way like a peacock fans his tail. The peacock at least gives a good show, but they don't really even give a good show. It's very, very, very superficial.
Yeah. I ran across this. So, the other day in a discussion, I kind of ran up against this, where and I don't know if this happens at your university. Do you have like community announcements kinds of things, stuff that goes out?
No,
No. Okay.
not
So
anymore. My last one, yes.
okay.
My present university is brilliant. They leave
Okay.
me alone.
But
They
okay.
like,
So, but at your last
yeah,
university, you did have this where like
yes.
stuff went out. Okay. And so what I realized and sort of, I sort of realized it on sort of like in the moment. I was aware of it, but I hadn't articulated it, that 90%, and I have counted it a bunch of times. So it, like about 90% of these community announcements are talking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion kinds of initiatives, activities, training, opportunities of various, grants, a new person appointed, a building dedicated, So when I was starting to think about that, and I'm like, well, no wonder people don't feel a lot of times like they have to read the literature or, just they know the language of the community announcements.
Mm,
Right? And that's good enough because you're just passing each other in the hallway and stuff. And so they can, get on board and in a very superficial kind of way and, feel like they belong to something that looks like it's very homogeneous. And, we're sort of like, I'm being part of the group. And so one of the things that I said to the endowed chair of academic freedom at my university,
oh, that idiot.
whom you met, yes, was, I'm like, you know what? You need to be putting out community announcements that include the language of academic freedom, of freedom of expression. Like those need to be in, because no, if you just saw even if you don't read them, you're just skimming them, right? You just skim to see if there's anything relevant to you. It's all the same. It's repetitive, similar content, similar tone, and the language is there. So as you're pointing out, like you can sort of speak the language in this very superficial
That's
way,
about all he can do.
and that's yeah. And so we need
But
to
that would
be.
help, right?
It would
But,
help to be
yeah.
able to speak the language of academic freedom. Would help. So yeah, I think that's, I mean, I do think people are remiss, and I think you're right that they're doing just what they need to do in order for that need to belong. They don't seem academically minded in terms of a lot of this DEI stuff. They're not applying themselves in the
No.
same way that you would expect them to if they were going to make a real argument.
Well, I mean, let's put it then, you know, they're not applying themselves in the same way that I have as a critic. I like this is what I can do. Like when I come up against these wokies, I'm often not shocked because I'm not surprised, but I'm often kind of I when I come up against them in debates or in battles with them, and I've had many battles with them, it's really funny because I prepare myself for the battles. Right, I read the literature, and I try and make the best steel man arguments that I could make based on the literature, and then I figure out how I'm going to defend against that. Right, and I figure out like I analyze it, and I try and skip over the inconsistencies and the weak parts and make the links where there aren't links and really try and build it up to be the best possible version of it that I think I could find out there. And then I'm sat in a room with an academic who is openly boasting about this is me, this is about all I'm about, right? And they just don't know their shit.
Well, I think when you think you're on, and they actually, I think, mentioned this, and that, when you think you're on the right side of history, when you think that, you have, when you think that your best argument is, sort of something you've mentioned before, sort of this like chess move. Well, like, do you believe that, social justice is important? Yes. Well, then kind of, it's sort of like, then how could you possibly, if you argue against it, you must be lying kind of
The
thing,
old bait and switch, right?
Yeah. And that's the best that's all they think they need. because I think that this sort of pluralistic ignorance, I think everybody sort of already, believes what they believe, and that anybody who doesn't will be, criticized by all the masses, behind them. So I don't know. I mean, it makes me sad and disappointed that I can't have some of the conversations that we have on this podcast
Yeah.
with other people. It makes me sad.
No, but here's the point. Let's say, even if you are a true believer, right? Like a full-on true believer in wokery, you would have to acknowledge that, let's give one example of wokery, right? Because there are kind of different threads to wokery. Let's say you're a critical race theory fanatic. You would have to acknowledge that there are significant differences, for example, between Kimberly Crenshaw and Charles Mills. Significant differences. And so therefore, you're at a university, presumably you're high IQ, you've got to study books in order to pass these exams, though I don't know if anybody's reading anything these days, honestly. And then, you're interested, you identify with it, well, presumably you'd want to have those discussions within what is permissible within the faith, right? Like in the same way that if you are a Catholic, there are certain disagreements between different branches of the Catholic Church, even though they broadly exist within the same organization, right? And you're a Catholic seminary, presumably you would want to discuss those things.
Yeah, if you're in a Catholic seminary, yeah. I mean, and that's what we would be sort of describe the university
well, no, but it's
right?
even narrower than that, right? Because in a Catholic seminary, you would have those discussions.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So it's worse than religious indoctrination, because at least religious indoctrination, allows some kind of discussion. Whereas
and
actually, this is all,
I think, encourages it, actually, because they want people to be able to spread the word, right?
Right.
So that's part of the indoctrination.
Which might be why, by the way, this is actually failing, because they can't spread the word. Again, they've got elite institutional capture, but among the general public, nobody has any time for this whatsoever.
Yeah. So basically, for ease of the discussion on the rest of the paper, they basically just say that we have this sort of push and pull between amassing resources and sharing resources amongst the group, both of which are valued and important for for society. And so they are talking. So I kind of liked, I'm going to kind of skip, because I liked when they started to talk about perception of time. So I'm going to skip to that part. Well, we can talk about morality first, but I really like the part about time. So conservatives, so this is the authors, this is a heavily cited paper, but they did not do any original research for this paper. But they're citing other people. So for example, conservative posts, so on social and liberal web pages, they found that conservative posts referred to the past more frequently than the future. So they used past-oriented language more, where liberal posts referred more to the future than to the past. And so I like this stuff because I like language and what language tells about cognition and stuff. So the left then seems to tend to think about improvements. So again, in their future language, sort of like we're on a journey towards something better. Okay. And the right is sort of skeptical of, they sort of feel like the journey was from the past to the present. They're very focused on how far we've come and how hard it was to get here, where the liberals are like, like the past really sucked and we're transitioning towards something better. Like we're only part way there. Like let's not get too excited. In fact, there's still some really crappy stuff right now. In terms of go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that I'm not entirely comfortable with that characterization. I'm comfortable with your characterization of conservatives, or the characterization in the paper of conservatives. Again, I'm going to say psychological conservatives because most of them are ideologically naive.
Well, again, I mean, really, if we focus on not
Sure.
sort of but on
Right.
what they're talking about here, either the amass of
But I think
resources or
that's
this,
right. Yeah, the amassing of resources is considered to
versus
be
the distribution of
versus
resources.
is absolutely right.
Mhm.
And also the journey from the past thing is really, really important, right? So what people who are psychologically conservative tend to do is to over romanticize the past and think that we've lost our way and that we need to go back. And this,
Well, I
for
think
example,
that, well, go ahead. Go ahead.
no,
Well, I was going to say that sort of like the amassing of resources was a hard and arduous journey. And they're nervous, according to this research, they would be nervous about changes because they might lose. It's like, look, I had to build these skills or build this
mhm.
company or, whatever. And if there's changes, maybe my company won't be as successful anymore, or maybe I won't make as much profit or something like that. And look how hard we've worked to get here.
So that's the reasonable conservative position, but there's also a kind of an unreasonable conservative position, right? Which is the kind of when you start to go bonkers right wing with fascism and things like that. And it's worth just mentioning it here because there is a connection between kind of conservatism and fascism, spoken as a conservative, in which it's not just about the accumulation of resources; it's this massive romanticization of the past. For example, the Germans would, under Hitler and the Nazis would start to revere kind of pagan gods and Wagner because his operas were all about the Norse gods and the Teutonic Knights and these big symbols of Germany's romantic past. Mussolini in Italy did the same thing with Roman symbolism, kind of to rebuild the kind of Roman Empire. In fact, lots of European empires tried to rebuild the Roman Empire, including the Tsars. You know what Tsar means?
Mm-hmm.
Caesar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they based all of their architecture on kind of Constantinople, Byzantine architecture. So there is this kind of right wing over romanticization with the past, and similarly on the left, there's this left wing over romanticization of the future.
Mm-hmm.
Of the utopia of the past and the utopia of the future, neither of which exists,
Right.
or ever existed, because reality is much more complicated than that. So that will be the point that I would make. In terms of liberals, I'm not sure that they do recognize that the status quo is good in any way.
Right. I mean, that's kind of what they're, suggesting here that, the left tends to think that, that continued and sweeping improvements, including to the psychology of individual members can and should be implemented to achieve something truly wonderful. So.
Yeah, I mean, you have to point out how delusional the whole thing is because they, I mean, there's so much arrogance that's bound up with a lot of left-wing thinking. We are here by the grace of God through the institutions that have slowly evolved over generations, and we've got to reform them too. That's our duty, if you like, to the people who are dead and the people who have yet to be born. If we see ourselves as belonging to a part of society, that is. So we've got to make these changes and improve them in the same way that our grandparents and their parents before them and so on and so forth did. But to think that you can do away with the whole thing and make something brand new out of nothing that's going to be somehow better, which is the left-wing thing, or to believe that, some of them even would argue, I bet, do you have any pro-Palestine protests at your university? I mean, some of them, no?
Not specifically, but certainly, nearby. Yeah, not specifically at my university, but yeah.
So, I was watching, I mean, this is a sample size of a few people that I'm watching on YouTube, so I should be careful about knowledge claims. But certainly there are people who make the case that that the West really is wonderful and rich and all these things are great. And they would know because they're at one of the world's most prestigious universities. So, either they come from an extremely privileged family, or the system has allowed them to be extremely privileged, right? The system has supported them, so it's worked for them. And they can see that, they understand that. But they think that the reason that has happened is because the West is taking away resources from other people. And so therefore they are the beneficiaries of evil, and it's their duty to deconstruct it.
Although I don't notice them giving up a lot.
Sorry?
I don't notice them giving up a lot.
No,
That movement.
no,
Yeah.
it's all performative, right?
Yeah.
Their excuse would be, well, I know I should give it all up, but really, what would be better, me giving it up or me using the advantages that I have to push back? And that's the kind of excuse they make for themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then they don't give up anything.
Right.
You first.
And then there is the morality part of it. So so they make the case that in small communities, really small groups, that you can kind of like shame people, and you can use sort of moral pressure, shame and guilt and that kind of thing, to manage society. But it doesn't take very long for society to get too big for that, and you have to have out west, you start the community and everything's fine, and then pretty soon you got to have a sheriff, right? And the sheriff has to occasionally um, rout out the bad guys. So a larger society needs law enforcement, and they need a system of laws. And so they're making the argument that the motivation to do what's right is no longer just about preserving your good name in the community. Because the community is so large, you can essentially kind of like maneuver. You can just sort of like leave some people behind and go find new friends, or not get found out, or whatever. So now it's sort of, we need a little bit of a power system, a system of fear, something that can be enforced. Maybe people getting arrested. So where they went, one of the ways that they went with that was a study on Twitter messages, and they found that moral language was used more often by the out of power party than in the currently dominant one. So both parties, no matter which party was in power, the other party used more moral language. So so they're just sort of like describing how moral language, morality is used to describe the position of either the liberal or the conservative. So those liberals have taken it too far. They're just, taxing everyone, and look at the economy is, gone to hell, and, because of their policies, and, immigration, they just open borders, and these are sort of, some morality things. And then you get the other side where it's like, well, it isn't fair, those conservatives, they've gotten rid of all the taxes for the rich people. The rich people aren't paying any taxes, and now the economy is being funded on the backs of the poor, and that kind of thing. And they're talking about, sort of like that both parties want to support those who are truly deserving, and don't want to support freeloaders. Okay, so they use that example over and over again, that the truly deserving, even if those deserving people are deserving, because they're down on their luck. Okay, they can be an unemployed person, they can be somebody who's struggled. If they're truly deserving, both people in both parties tend to want to help that person, at least for a while. But neither party wants to help, continue to help a freeloader. But what happens is the parties see the deserving and the freeloaders in different ways. And they're sort of describing so that's the morality of that, the time aspects of that. um they just see different levels of deservingness and uh I don't know, value uh in helping, not helping, that kind of thing. And I thought that was really, I mean, it's a simple example, um, but I liked that they used that example over and over again. So um, I don't know. I liked that. So we have the left uh, villainizes greedy capitalists, right? And the right villainizes, people who fail to contribute resources and instead live off the hard work, of others. So it's sort of a way of, courting votes
Hmm.
by describing that same idea. You know, some people deserve benefits, freeloaders don't. Who are those people? What does it mean to be a freeloader, and that kind of thing? So I don't know what you thought of that
Yeah, I
sort of
mean,
theme.
no, I completely agree. I mean, there's not. I mean, I don't think that people on the left are generally speaking evil, unless they kind of veer very strongly indeed into authoritarianism, or on the right either. I mean, I started my life as somebody very much on the left, raised by champagne socialists, shall we say? um, but I was I had the kind of, I remember as a teenager having this kind of boogeyman kind of conceptualization of American evangelical Christians, um, with whom I don't agree with on a lot of things, right? Because they're very, very religious. Um, and yet when I met American evangelical Christians, I was quite surprised to find that they were perfectly lovely. I'm sure that there are a few nasty people among them, of course, but generally speaking, they're all very nice. And that was kind of an interesting moment for me. I mean, I I really remember when it happened. It was at my last university, and when I joined, I was warned quite strongly against one person in particular, because she was evil and she didn't believe that climate change was real. She was this, that, and the other, and I believed those people. But then I thought, well, I should probably find out. And I was also fascinated, right? Because it's like, well, somebody with all of these crazy points of view, I've got to get to know this person because I need to know how she thinks. Like, how do you get to that? Because I talked to her in passing, so I could see that she wasn't dumb. Um, so I had to, like, this is fascinating. Like, I have to get to know how and pick apart these positions. Like, and nobody else could be bothered. They were just denouncing her as evil. And that was Krista, who became a friend of who you met, who has become a very close friend of mine. And of course, that what they said about her only had a very, very, very passing accuracy with the truth. She was just an old kind of fashioned Christian Republican. That was it. I mean, she has some funny beliefs in so far that she's skeptical of evolution, which is just silly, Krista, really. But, but all that means is that she's wrong. It doesn't mean, as far as I'm concerned, right? It doesn't, and she thinks I'm wrong. One of us has evidence, the other doesn't. But regardless of that, from her perspective, her thinking that I'm wrong doesn't make me evil, and neither does my thinking that she is wrong on that point make her evil either. And both of us and the people who were criticizing her as well, all of us would say that we want to make the world a better place, right? It's just that we have some slightly different views on it. But she was thoroughly demonized in my last university. And then I, of course, because I became friends with her, I was guilty by association.
Yeah, I mean, and
Fuck
this
them.
is what they're.
Fuck
This
them.
really is what
Don't
they're.
care. Yeah.
But this is really what they're talking about, right? Like
Mm.
that um, we're not focused necessarily on different values. We're focused
No.
on different ways of making society better. And so
Yeah.
they're
I'm
doing
not even
both. We're
sure.
doing both things. really pretty effectively,
right.
amassing resources and sharing them. Just maybe not. We just keep bouncing back and forth instead of coming to a way to do it sort of
See, I mean,
consistently well. We go bouncing back and forth, and
it,
they're arguing that we pretty much have to.
here's where a bit of skepticism is going to creep in on my behalf, right? So certainly, if you look at it from an ideological point of view, right? If you look at the philosophical arguments for the left and for the right, then absolutely they're correct that the left focuses on distributing resources and the right focuses on amassing resources. That's correct in my view. However, even going by the set of academics who presumably would be the people who know stuff about these things, I don't even know if they think about it in that detail. Like, even in that detail. I don't really, I don't know even if it has anything to do with the political ideologies which they claim they are beholden to, and whether it's just base tribalism. You know, like
The need to
uh,
belong.
the need to, yeah, like I support the Yankees and you support the, I don't know,
Red Sox.
Tigers, whatever
Red
baseball
Sox.
teams you have in America. Red Sox, okay. You know, there's no ideological difference between the Yankees and the Red Sox,
Right.
is there? And there is an ideological difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. But I wonder whether the people who follow them, including academics, really buy into that ideological difference. And even if they do, that they're buying into it not because they actually believe it to be true. And the reason I say that is because I don't find any kind of discussion generally, even among academics, in the ideological differences, which would seem to show that there isn't much of an interest in them,
Yeah.
and whether it's just
Well,
pure tribalism.
that goes back to like where we started, when I was
Mm.
saying, when you were saying, like, people aren't really bothering to read, say,
No,
critical social justice stuff,
well,
and I was saying, well, like, if you sort of use my example of community announcements, sort of
mm,
extend that to social media, that people, are mostly, especially young people, mostly getting their news from social media, and even the rest of us. I mean, there's almost no nonpartisan news anymore. I mean, you see, basically whatever news you get would be partisan
oh
for the
yeah,
most part. It did not used to be that way, but now it is. And so as we get fed, what what we the language and such, and ideas or whatever that we can use to maintain our feelings, our need to belong to our in group, maybe we feel less inclined, as I was sort of talking about earlier, less inclined to even bother to read more of the material. We can speak the language that's
right.
required in our in group, and maybe that's, sadly, even amongst academics, maybe that's enough for most people to feel like they belong. And um, I mean, I mean, like, I guess I felt good about reading this paper, but now I kind of feel bummed out because I think you might be right that, maybe most people aren't thinking about it this way. But this paper kind of gave me hope. It's like, oh yeah, most people want to genuinely help people who are deserving, and genuinely don't want to help don't want to continue to support freeloaders. And so if we could come together on that, could we come together on a way of managing that, or accept that sometimes it's going to go a little more one way and a little more the other way?
I mean, I think that they think that you should, right? So
The
the
authors,
key
you
that,
mean?
no, the
Oh,
people. So people think that you should help those in need, right?
mhm.
So people who identify, whether they identify in a ideologically coherent sense or they're just posturing like tribalistically, they think that you should help people in need if you're on the left and the right, right? The left would tend to say we should do this through government programs, and the right would say, well, it's more the domain of
Right,
charity.
right.
They think that you should, but that doesn't mean that they want to, right?
Yeah.
So, like, for example, I think that I should go to the gym after this podcast, but I don't want to, and I'm not going to. Just not
Well,
going
I
to do
mean,
that.
to go back to our DEI example too, it's, like we were laughing. It's like, I mean, people at my university carry on about how we should have more diversity, um, in our faculty, but I don't see any of them quitting
No,
in
they don't
order
care.
to make way for
I
our
mean,
diverse candidates.
so this is such a good point that you're making, right? So they don't know what they're talking about, and B, they don't care either. It's just
Right.
like it's manners, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
like um don't fold your arms. There's no reason for that, right? There's no reason why that should be considered rude. People interpret in a certain way, but it might just be because I'm cold. There are a whole host of reasons why I might fold my arms, and people can be put off by that or not put off by that. But I try not to do it because it's good manners. And it seems to me that that's all this stuff is. That it's uncritically accepted as being good, in spite of the numerous examples that we could lay off of why it's authoritarian and bad and being used to abuse people and so on and so forth ad nauseum. But it's just uncritically accepted in the same way that good manners would be.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
That's it. That's the
Yeah,
level of analysis.
that is. Yeah.
And so the people who are pushing it, then A, they don't care, and B, they don't even know the reason for why they're pushing it, other than it advances their social status within whatever moronic cohort they happen to languish in. I'm
So do
glad I
you
don't languish in any of them anymore, by the way. Fuck off.
So do you think the authors are right that it's possible that understanding our opponents, and that they're sort of, I mean, this is what they say, they're performing a task that serves society's best interest, that it might, you know, reduce sort of what they're calling the knee-jerk hostility and destructive.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think yes, up to a point, right? So I think that it's really important that people on the center left and people on the center right. So you think about your average Republican voter and your average Democrat voter. They have there are differences, and I think that the authors of the paper are right that the people on the center right tend to focus on getting resources, and the people on the left tend to focus on distributing, but they both also recognize that distribution and the acquisition of resources is also important. Whether they agree with that out of ideological reasons or it's just, as I would suspect, the neighborhood you've grown up in and the people you're around. That's what I suspected. Like if you grow up in a Christian community, you're going to be a Christian, or a Muslim community, you're going to be a Muslim. Doesn't mean that you really have thought about or interrogated these ideas. You've just kind of acquired them from the people around you. But that said, the ideas themselves are nevertheless acquired, and they do focus on those things. And I think that's correct. And I think for these people, understanding each other is very, very important. And what is especially important is understanding that people on the center left, so people on the center left need to understand that people on the center right are closer to them, ideologically speaking, than people on the far left are. Right? That they have more mainstream Republicans and mainstream Democrats have far more in common with each other than they do with wokies and MAGA types. That's the realization that is needed. So I think that is possible. I think that is plausible. And I think that if that happens, that would be a very, 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 very good thing.
it would be a good thing for, so then you wouldn't vote knee jerk, right? Sort of just
MAGA.
like, right? Well, yeah, hopefully. But also, I mean, it would make a difference. I think you've made this argument outside of the podcast, but it might make a difference in terms of, of politicking, right? Of going out and stumping and talking to people.
Yeah, absolutely. These parties need to appeal to the moderate middle. And there's empirical evidence. I mean, the Americans' Hidden Tribes, and we should go over that evidence at some point. The Americans' Hidden Tribes, in fact, we could do a podcast on that. Project shows that the center right and the center left are very reasonable, and they're both completely exhausted with their respective extremes. And so politicians, for whatever reason, are not aware of this. And they need to be made aware of it, because if they did, they would campaign to the moderate middle. And that would be a huge success.
Because getting those people getting people to realize that you do have more in common would actually get you to think about the candidate, right? Think about their platform, think about what they're saying, and wait, I actually have more in common with this person, even though they're left or they're right in terms of their, they have a D or an R next to them. They actually agree. I have more in common with them in terms of, their ideas, what they think they say they want to do, and that kind of thing, and get people to actually vote for the candidate as opposed to the party.
And it's not just politics either. So, legacy and social media have been giving, because legacy and social media companies will tend to employ people from the most prestigious universities. The most prestigious universities are these places where woke ideology is completely taken over, right? They are, you're more likely to be woke because if you are woke, you're more likely to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend or be popular or whatever, right? And so these people are being employed and they're going into social media companies and they're turning these companies woke. They're turning corporations woke. Classic example, Disney. And so then Disney thinks, well, okay, when I was at the people working within Disney think, well, when I was at university, what made me popular? Well, it was coming out with Black Lives Matter and all this kind of nonsense, right? Or presenting or saying that the whole of society is racist and needs to be deconstructed, or accusing white people of this kind of evil and that kind of evil, all these kind of nonsense ideological talking points that they have, which are nonsense because, as we've gone over many, many times in this podcast, they just don't map onto reality at all. In fact, the contrary is true. But what they do map onto is by saying that at one of these prestigious universities like Harvard or Stanford or somewhere like that, or Oxford in the UK, that will get you social status. So then they go into these companies and they carry on doing that. And that carries on giving them social status within the companies within which they work. And then they present that to the public. And no, it doesn't work. And they keep doing it, right? They keeping pumping this stuff out. Another show after another show, another movie after movie after movie after movie, billions of dollars going into this stuff. And all of it is killed stone dead by the public because the public isn't interested. Right, the public isn't Harvard,
right?
And so what? And see, this is what is really needed is some kind of organization. And I've been trying to make ILV this, but who knows? Some kind of organization that can say, look, the general public is not authoritarian. They're not left-wing authoritarian or right-wing authoritarian. If you want to appeal to voters, don't go down the route of the loud people that are being promoted by legacy and social media. That doesn't resonate with the public. That's why I don't think.
Well, it does. I mean, and evidence that it does is the amount that people are consuming of that. So it
but they're not.
resonates. Oh, they are consuming the social media and that's what people are doing all day long. I mean, that's like the extremity. The more extreme the narrative, the more people click and keep reading and reply and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, they might consume it in the sense that they're getting angry with it and cross with it, and there certainly are people wokies who consume it in the very traditional way in which they consume it and enjoy it, but they're a minority. Take, for example, like my favorite TV show, Doctor Who.
Oh no, I'm not disagreeing with you on the television show. Like, people aren't paying to go to movies that have I don't disagree with you on that. I'm talking about sort of like, I guess what I'm disagreeing with is that I think that the extreme rhetoric is very appealing to people in the moment. It's attention capturing, and so it is fueling.
Oh,
So to tell, I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking
I mean,
about this
absolutely. No, no,
on the
no. So,
fly.
is it resonating in the sense that are people engaging with it? Like, yeah, if you look at the numbers, so back to Doctor Who, they make the Doctor black and gay, and not just black and gay, but is lecturing. People are being lectured on pronouns and all this kind of just ugh. It's so tired, and that's really shocking. It's so tired and old and boring. It's just cringe at this point. And so the figures, the viewing figures are lower than they've ever been.
Mm.
Even back in the William Hartnell era, which was in the 60s when it was in black and white and the population was much smaller, the figures are now below that. And it's got more money than ever and higher production values. So people aren't engaging with the topic, but you're right, people are engaging with the rhetoric around it. So for example, people are saying that, probably a million videos on YouTube of people saying that this cringe woke nonsense is the end of civilization. No, it's not even the end of Doctor Who, right? Doctor Who is dead, RIP, all of this kind of extreme rhetoric, right? No, what will happen is the show will fail, people won't watch it, and then somebody will pick up the IP for cheap and reboot it when corporations have come to their senses. And that's what we need to do, by the way.
Yeah.
We need to bring these people to their senses and show them that, that the public is not extreme on either side.
I think that just
so the extreme rhetoric does resonate.
Yeah, I think just like companies, as you were describing, sort of like getting confused, not understanding the difference between the the extreme rhetoric and profitability. I think that politicians maybe don't understand the difference between the extreme rhetoric and the likes and stuff, and actually getting things done.
No, they don't.
They have this idea that, like, I'm getting lots of likes on Twitter, so look how productive I am. No, actually, things getting done.
No, nothing's getting done. And Twitter is not a reflection of reality, right?
Exactly. So yeah, and unfortunately, we can't just like let it go, run its course, and well, I mean, I guess we can because that's what's been going on. Let it run its course, like Doctor Who, and not get enough, like not get enough uh, views that it's not worth it, right? And then someone else will pick it up and sort of remake it in a better form. Unfortunately, I think if that is what happens, we're in deep crap because we have to wait for all of that to
no, I mean, I think that we do have to wait for all that. But I think, unless we, as in you and I, working with other people, can wake people up.
Right.
Right. But the problem is that, even within our circle, there are people who are falling for extreme rhetoric.
And I think that's, I mean, you know what? Like, to me, that's fascinating to me because it's like, okay, that's the ways in which we are all vulnerable to this. And I told you before, like, I'm fascinated by my own hypocrisies. And I wish that more of us would look at those hypocrisies and try to figure out, like, how is it we can hold these ideas at the same time? And like, we are all, this is what we talk about most on the podcast, is how we are all, vulnerable human beings who are subject to various degrees. Some of these things, like, we would say, oh, that doesn't apply to me most of the time. But frankly, most of the time it does apply to all of us. And a lot of the times we don't even know that we're doing it. And so this time is difficult for all of us. And it's time when we need to know more about our own psychology and others and, be more forgiving of all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I talk to Rio about a lot. It's like, so for example, all of these crazy weirdos with pink hair on Twitter going on about transitioning children and the rest of it. Transitioning children, I mean, yeah, I don't think it should happen at all. but neither do most trans people or gay people think that you should be doing that either.
Yeah, this is
There
like
is not. It's just like a fringe group of weirdos, and to be clear, a fringe group of weirdos can do quite a lot of damage, especially when they're backed by social media and foreign intelligence services. But there are a fringe group of weirdos, and they can only do so much damage. You know, so if a bloke is wearing a dress and wants to be called a she, and you still think that they're a bloke, is that really the end of Western civilization?
No.
I mean, you want to be called a she? Okay.
Whatever.
I mean, I have like a little bit more of an issue people wanting to be called a they, because it just like fucks the language up and confuses me. Like, how many people are there in the room?
Yeah.
But whatever. Okay. You know,
I mean, we do, yeah. We are professors. We do have content to cover, so let's move on.
Right. There's more important things to talk about. I just don't. I was having this argument with Benjamin Boyce, like Leslie's, and you know, he was got in a tiffy about trans adults, and it's harmful, and it's, you know, and it's all a mental illness. Okay, I don't think it is most of the time, but maybe it is. Don't care, really don't. But it's harmful. So is smoking.
Right. Drinking.
I'm not giving up drinking. Like, no, you can take my scotch from my cold, dead hands. I don't care. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't care. You know, are there people? Here's more of a point. Are there people who have been manipulated and abused into transitioning, and is that a bad thing? And should I care about it? Yeah, but I don't. If it was somebody I knew, I would. Right, and if you made a documentary and sat me through the documentary, I would care about that individual.
I don't think it's this huge social problem. It's not like it's not a conspiracy.
No, here's the point, right? And this is where you were correct, right? About in terms of consumption, like the product is not being consumed, but the extreme rhetoric is. And so that people who think that it is this whole kind of social contagion thing, and propagate extremist rhetoric on that, you know, in that way, are a problem. You know, it is a problem, for example, that, okay, let me roll that back a bit. It is a good thing that LGBT acceptance in the Anglosphere is as high as it is, like relative to the rest of the world. That is a good thing. Why is that a good thing? Well, okay, you know, let's look at the UK. Alan Turing, you know Alan Turing?
Yes. I mean, yes and no. I mean,
So he was part of the team that invented the Enigma machine, which decoded the Nazis' transmissions, which meant that the Brits and the Americans could figure out where they were going, and basically brought the war to an end much quicker than it otherwise would have, and saved loads of lives, right? He was not in prison. He was arrested and put on trial for being gay, and they gave him a choice between prison or taking hormone pills to reduce his libido. He chose the latter. It caused all kinds of side effects, and he ended up killing himself. Okay, he was 42 when he killed himself, so same age as me. What would he have gone on to achieve?
Right.
We don't know.
And again, what harm? This is the moral argument that they're making in the article here, right? That when someone feels that they're not in power, that they don't have enough power, that when a party feels that they don't have enough power, when a movement feels that it doesn't have enough power, what does it do? It makes a moral argument against, the whatever they think is in power. And so, this sort of moral argument, and sometimes that works, right? Sort of, again, with the sort of like, let's take same-sex marriage, right? It's like, well, what do you care if we're married? Like, what is that? What harm is that doing to you? And that moral argument makes sense. It's like, you know what? You're right. It doesn't matter who's living, it really doesn't matter.
Let me, because you're not married, right?
No,
Officially.
officially.
Officially, right? So I'm sure that at some point somebody might make the argument to you that by living in sin, you are bringing down Western society and the institution of marriage, and this is going to have a horrible impact upon the children. The children.
Yes,
Will
which I
somebody
can't,
think of the
which
children?
which is far too late for me to produce.
Right,
Yes.
but but these kinds of arguments are made, and people think that gay people are in power at the moment. People think that I actually see people saying that America is being ruled by Jewish gay communists.
Right.
Um,
Well, and yeah, again, so this is sort of what we're talking, what the article is saying, right? Is that
mm,
the moral
yes,
argument gets used, when really, again, I mean, I I think that we could boil it down to, I mean, they boiled it down to one thing, which is amassing resources versus distributing them. I mean, that's overly simplified, but we could probably come up with 10 things that most people would agree on. And then just with little tweaks, we could kind of even go back and forth and not get these crazy swings, and have a pretty functioning society.
yeah. I mean, the problem, and again, going back to social media, politicians, people on television, everyday people in the street really need to understand that social media is not a reflection of reality, of the real social world that is out there. And that's not my opinion. Again, Our World in Data, we should do more of a dive into this, shows that. But I think you've briefly alluded to other studies which show that to be true as well. And this one also seems to be true because, at the moment, like just before Elon Musk took over at Twitter, I was on Twitter. It was, you would be forgiven for thinking that wokies weren't ruling the planet, right? Because all of the interactions, like if you said something vaguely controversial, you'd get a mob of people going after you. You weren't even on Twitter,
No.
and it happened to you.
Yeah.
So I love these people say, "Oh, I'm not on social media, so it's not going to affect me." You don't have to
No,
be. You really don't have to be. So you know what it's like, right? I mean, it's pretty awful. And then obviously the people in your university probably thought that was normal. They didn't realize that that's not a reflection of reality, right? So they jumped in on the mobbing too. You won't call them stupid, but I will. And now if you're on Twitter, it's kind of the opposite is true, right? So the wokies who were favored under the previous regime, they're not enjoying any boost anymore like they used to.
Okay.
No, right? So, you're not going to, if you say something vaguely controversial, you're not going to get mobbed. And now, guess who's getting a boost?
The other side.
The other side, right?
Yeah.
Like wackos from the other. I'm not. By the way, by the other side, I'm not talking about mainstream Republicans,
Right.
right? Just in the same way that when I'm talking about wokies, I'm not talking about mainstream leftists, mainstream Democrats, even mainstream Marxists, for goodness'
We're
sake.
talking about radical left.
Well, radical by Marxist standards, right? Because at least most Marxists you can have a conversation with, and they recognize these people as being cray-cray as well. Cray-cray, that's an American thing. I just used an Americanism.
Okay.
Apparently, it's an African American thing.
Okay.
Anyway, crazy.
I haven't heard it, but okay.
It means crazy. Apparently,
I knew what you meant. I did know.
Very
what you
good.
Meant. Yes.
And yes, so even by Donald Trump voting standards, these people are bonkers. Like cheering on Iran, calling themselves MAGA communists, fans of the CCP, saying, "I support Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is great. Xi Jinping is Asia's Stalin." That's the level of craziness that is being boosted. And because you can get a little boost if you pay for your account. This person who said that hasn't paid for their account and is getting algorithmically boosted by Twitter because that's what's going on over there.
It's even a person.
Yeah, it's probably a group of people over at the.
Well, no, I mean like like an AI, a bot, right?
Maybe. So that's what's being promoted over at Twitter by people who aren't paying for accounts. So there's clearly some algorithmic boosting going on there. And look, I'm not saying that X, or formerly known as Twitter, is being run by the FSB. I'm not saying that. I am saying that if it was, it would probably look a lot like it looks now. Um, really, because there's just enough disagreement and engagement for plausible deniability. But yeah,
Yeah.
um, so it's clearly not reflecting reality. You know, it didn't reflect reality when it was under the previous regime and it was pushing all this woke nonsense. And it doesn't reflect reality under the current regime where it's pushing all this kind of weirdo Chinese Communist Party, North Korean fanboy weirdness. In neither case that it does. Most people are sane. Most people are grown-ups.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is convince people, be they politicians or people working in companies like Disney, that they should stop appealing to children, to ideological children, not actual children. You know, you can
Yeah.
make shows for children. Should stop appealing to these idiots at Harvard and Yale. You know, they may be high intelligence, but they're idiots because they're behaving in
Well,
idiotic
they're
ways.
intellectually immature,
Oh,
ideologically
hugely.
immature, that kind of.
Right. You know, because, you know, if you're going to call yourself a communist in 2024, well, you know, those regimes have all failed, right? It's kind of a bit silly, really.
Yeah.
Similarly, you know, if you're going to identify with the Chinese Communist Party, for which there is ample example of all kinds of horrendous human rights abuses, and then say that you somehow know better and that any argument to the contrary is, you know, done by them, the Jews or whoever, then you're a bit immature. You might not be dumb in terms of IQ, but, you know, you're not. Your tether to reality is not a great one. And these people exist, but we need to stop appealing to them. If Disney wants to go out and make a lot of money, right? Somebody like you or I could help Disney go out and make a lot of money. And the way we do that is we say, right, okay, well, you need to reconnect your story arc to story arcs that have worked for centuries, like Odysseus and the, you know, Perseus and the Minotaur or whatever, right? Because the stories, the names and the faces and the characters, maybe even the personalities change, but the essential folklore really stays the same. That's what resonates with humans. That's what you need to go back to. So, I mean, we could do that. We could tell people how to go and make a bunch of money with media. We could tell politicians how to get elected, who to appeal to.
To a large extent, people already know this. I think they need permission, again, to act on their original mission. And
Right.
I don't mean original as in like the Wayback Times, but I mean like, let's just take the mission of, amassing resources and distributing resources. Like these are missions that, are more, that have been at the core of, most even companies, right? So we want to be profitable, and we want to pay. We want to, distribute the resources. We want to pay our employees and provide them with health insurance and, abilities to, to move up the ladder, to satisfy other goals other than just monetary ones, right? So there's other distribution of other ways to distribute resources. But they've gotten sidetracked by a whole different mission and confused that mission is of equal import, and they're running parallel to each other, and they're in competition with one another. They're preventing both. So while simultaneously arguing, no, we're going to help you amass resources and we are going to help you distribute resources, they are at odds.
So this is actually a really good example. So going back to the kind of the Disney example, okay, so Disney is charged by its shareholders, it's a publicly owned company, right, with amassing resources, right, from getting views and so on and so forth, subscriptions to Disney Plus, movie, people going that's what the company is charged with doing, and it would know how to do that. It's very good at doing that, right? It has about a century of institutional experience making movies that were wildly successful in that regard. And yet then it has this alternative mission, which is promoting ideology. And it can't do both.
Right. Yeah.
It's trying to do both.
Yeah.
And what's happening is it's trying to do both, but it's leaning towards promoting ideology. And because it's going down that direction, the stock prices don't lie. Its value is tanking. It's failing to amass resources.
What this article is arguing, and I think what we see, is then, unfortunately, then you get, the pendulum swings the other way, right? It has to, and that hurts everybody also. I mean, that's not good for society, for things to go too far another direction. And I think that, I mean, I've said this before, so I know this is boring, but I think that a lot of companies and universities act as if that original mission was didn't need to be tended, didn't need to be watered and fed and taken care of, that they could go on this alternative path for a while, and that mission went without saying. And I think universities more so even than companies. Of course, we're going to make these, whatever superhero movies and that kind of, and there's still going to be, people are still going to come. We're not going to lose anybody because they love they love superheroes. So we can attend to this other mission, and meanwhile, we will never lose, sight of the original one. And I think that they're finding that it's wrong, and they don't know how to bring it back together again.
No, and they also don't understand they don't understand why people aren't watching these movies.
I think they do.
I don't. So they come out and say, like, people are not watching movies with gay characters in because they're homophobic.
Oh yeah, but
and that's not the case.
No, it's not.
Or because they're racist, and that's not the case either.
I don't believe that Disney executives are saying that in the boardroom.
Certainly the content producers are. That's what some of the actors and the directors are coming out and saying.
Maybe they're saying that. I'm not sure they believe it, but I also don't think that the executives are saying. I mean, I think they're probably a little freaked out. Like, I think they're starting to realize, like, oh crap, we've created this, sort of alternative universe. And now things aren't going
well. Then that's exactly what they've done. They've created an alternative universe that's completely divorced from reality.
Yeah.
The reality is that society hasn't really changed much since the 1990s. When, again, our classic example, because I love it, when the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was a big thing. If society was really racist in the 1990s, that wouldn't have been a massive hit. And society hasn't really changed.
I don't think that, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. But look, if somebody's not buying a product, I think that most companies, I think, the iPad, for example, is an exception. I mean, that was sort of like, I'm going to build a product that nobody knows that they want, and then I'm going to create a need for it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that let's set that aside. But let's just take, superhero movies and Disney movies and stuff. I don't think that most movie executives are saying to themselves, well, let's make society less racist, so that our movies that haven't done well will then be more popular. So some movie that I made 5 years ago with, like, with gay characters and, all that kind of stuff that people didn't like very well. Let's instead of altering the movie formula, let's make society less racist and homophobic, whatever. I mean, I don't think they want to do that. I don't think it's like, no, I'm in the business of making movies. I'm not in the business of altering, public opinion. Give the public what they want. So I do think they're aware that they're doing that this is messed up.
So why are they doing it?
I don't think they know what to do about it.
No, what I think is happening is I think that they probably know that the public is against this stuff and it won't sell. But I just don't think that they can change course as things are, because their organizations are full of people who believe in this ideology. Maybe they don't
or
believe, or who are going through the hoops,
who
right?
going, yeah,
Going through
yeah,
the
yeah,
making, yeah.
because they're thinking to themselves like, well, what about my paycheck tomorrow? And so I'm going to say the things that I think my in group, my, you know, uh, I have a need to belong, and so I'm going to
Yeah.
stick with
So,
that. So I think there's a fair amount of that.
do you know about the James Damore story? Do you know about that one?
Mm-mm.
He was a engineer at Google, and Google put out some kind of survey. I might be getting it wrong, but the vague story is this: that Google put out some kind of survey saying, how can we get more women involved with engineering?
I think I
And he was
do
an
remember
engineer.
this.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he said something like, he put something out that's saying, statistically speaking, women tend to be interested in things and men tend to be interested in people. It's not true for all women or all men, but we might want to reorient. And he was sacked,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was true. So, even at a company like Google, you can be sacked for saying things that are true. And the people who sacked him must have known that was true.
Well, yeah, of course they do, because when they put out a job notice, they don't. It's not that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of women engineers. There simply aren't enough. Women engineers who to hire. It's the same with PhDs. For example, Asian people who identify as Asian who get PhDs tend not to go into academia. They go into higher paying private jobs. At my university, they say that they don't have enough minority PhDs, and yet we have more minority full-time tenure track faculty than the yearly average that graduate from PhD programs. So we're doing pretty well, not in every category and across every, but if I'm just making this up, but say, if remember one category was like 9% of PhDs are in this category, and our university has like 12% of the faculty fit into that category. Okay, so, we're check, doing pretty well. In fact, we're beating the odds, right? So, of course, they know that there's not enough women engineers to make equal every department. There's not enough women. There's not 50% of engineering graduates, whether it's computer engineering or, like you said, bridge, things like building bridges. There's not enough women. And so what are we going to do? Like make them do that? Oh, this is what's going to be equal. So when you were born, it's like, oop, we needed another engineer. So that's
You're
what
interested
you're
in
doing.
social work? Tough shit.
Tough
you're
shit.
you're going to
Exactly.
go and make bridges.
Yeah. And I mean, I certainly don't believe with everything, especially recent Jordan Peterson, little off the beaten path,
He's gone a bit mad,
but
hasn't he?
yeah, but he has made some, he has spoken the truth about a lot of these statistics, and sort of framed it in a way that I think resonates with a lot of people, which is that women are making choices that are often smarter than the choices that men are making in terms of their lifestyle and their well-being and the well-being of their children and that kind of thing. So again, to use use something like teaching, for example, it gives you, what does it give you? It gives you summers, and you're off earlier in the day, and you get to go to your kids' baseball games, and pick them up from school and all that kind of stuff. There's real social value in that. There's real family value in that, and there's real intrinsic value. I mean, you're a parent who is actually doing that, in more of that in your family, right? Sort of doing more of the running of the kids and everything. That and that is that that choice. For it seems like women are less interested in climbing the social. Like the payoff isn't that great. It's like the money that I'm going to make, and I'm going to have to work 60, 80 hours a week. That's not right for everyone. And the fact that more women choose not to make that choice, not to sacrifice their health, their family, and that kind of stuff for some of those things, he makes a good argument, I guess.
I mean, the point that you'd have to make would be, okay, what is the difference in terms of your lifestyle if you have a massive salary versus a
Right,
okay one?
right,
Not much.
right. I mean, most
You
of the
know,
research says that if you have enough money if you have not just enough money to get by, not paycheck to paycheck, but if you have, I mean, money does make you happier, but only up to a point.
right.
And then other things, come into play. And, maybe, I mean, Jordan Peterson sort of is making the argument and he is a psychologist. He originally was using psychological research that maybe women had a different tipping point where they said, you know what, the money isn't worth it. The time, the hours, whatever, isn't worth it. And, there's an evolutionary point to be made. Women are carrying the baby. It's actually part of them for a period of time. And there's a different kind of connection there. So, yeah, there's just not enough. So yeah, absolutely. That guy from Google knew, I mean, the world knew that there weren't enough female engineers to solve this problem, and that perhaps one might want to think about that before one put out the other message. Yeah.
So you can be sacked by saying something that's just objectively true.
Yes. Yeah.
So but that's the situation in these companies, right? So they probably, what you would say is they probably know that them pushing all of this nonsense is going to fail and lose the company a lot of money, but they can't say that because if they do, they might be another James Damore in the sense that they might just sack them for pointing out something that everybody knows is true.
And I think that, I mean, this is where psychology and like this podcast and stuff come in. It's like, I think that the trick is that people can say it when enough people can say it.
A critical
And
mass.
yes, because there is, there are more of us, as again, where we started in the podcast, there's more people sort of in the middle who aren't enamored with, either extreme, who, who think it's okay to say something like, well, we'd like to hire more women, but they're just not out there, Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that, so we have other forces, other reasons that people can't, that can't say it is not really true.
I'm even more old-fashioned than that.
True.
I'm going to say something even more old-fashioned and controversial than that. Somebody's gender should not be among the criteria, or their race should not be among the criteria on whether they're hired.
Right.
It's unbelievable that is a controversial subject,
You're right.
sentence to say.
You're right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And most people, I think, would agree with that. I think
right.
most Black people would agree with that.
Right. Yes.
In fact, I think there might even be data on that. That race shouldn't be in the criteria. It shouldn't be, okay, I've got candidate A and candidate B. Candidate A is maybe a little bit better, but he's white, and therefore we're going to go with candidate B. But it's controversial to say that that's obviously stupid, even though it is obviously stupid to most people.
Yeah.
And this is how narratives have been manipulated. And, some people may think that, well, it's not even, so here's going back to the Disney executive thing. It's not even that they don't realize that narrative doesn't resonate with the public. They just understand that it resonates within their organization, so they can't put a foot out of line.
Right.
Until we give them permission to.
Right. Yeah.
And on that cheery note, you have permission to get fired at Disney for pointing out something that is obviously true. And if your company was to act upon it, you would save your country. Not save. You would propel your company into success. But you can't do that apparently because of nonsense. Excellent. Thank you very much.